Welcome to the Spot On Insurance podcast, brought to you by Insurance Licensing Services of America, ILSA. This is Ted Tavares.
And this is Arlene Tavares, coming to you from gorgeous Puerto Rico. Today, we'll be inviting our ILSA experts to share their knowledge.
But before we get started, don't forget to click on the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And now here's our host, Doug Foresta.
Hello and welcome to Spot On Insurance. This is your host, Doug Foresta. Today, my guest with me is Kristy Roberts. She is the Licensing, Compliance, Sales, and Intake Department Manager for ILSA. Kristy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into today's topic, which is agency name changes, I thought maybe you could just say a little bit about what you do at ILSA and your position there.
I have been at ILSA for 10 years now. I started out in the compliance department, processing affiliations. I soon moved over to the licensing department, and there I processed the certificate of authority applications. Shortly thereafter, I started processing license applications, and once I did that, I started falling in love with it, and I haven't stopped since. So I really enjoy the compliance aspect of licenses and submitting the applications and getting those licenses issued. So that's about it.
That's wonderful. And I wonder if you could say a little bit, maybe where we can start in terms of this topic is if you can share with us, what are some of the pitfalls that you see that your clients run into when they try to change the name of their agency?
There's so many pitfalls that they can fall into. They just simply want to change their name, that maybe they were bought out, or there's been a merger, or they say, okay, well, we've been doing business as this name. Let's just go ahead and change our true name to the DBA. They think it's going to be something simple, and then lo and behold, it turns into a big old mess. But one major hiccup that our clients face when they start the process is they change their tax ID. When an agency changes their tax ID, it causes so many headaches and so much more money when it comes to the applications, because most of the departments of insurance, their application information, the license, all of them are tied to the tax ID. So if you go from one tax ID under one name to another tax ID with another name, those licenses, they don't match up anymore. So the departments of insurance are going to make you, in some cases, submit whole new applications. Those applications are going to require more fees, whereas if they just change the name of the agency and don't mess with the tax ID, it's going to be a much simpler process. Another pitfall, a common one, is name approval. There's not so many states out there, but there's a handful of states out there that if you use one specific word in the name, then you're going to have to go to that state and get name approval. For example, California. In California, if the agency has insurance in their name, insurance must be followed by a couple of definitive words, either agency, services, marketing, sales solutions centers, something that identifies that agency from an insurance carrier. Or they don't want the public to get any kind of misconceptions that they're searching for an insurance carrier or an insurance company versus an actual insurance agency.
Kristy, is there a way for me to know? I mean, obviously, this is why I think working with you is so important, but is there a way for me to know those state requirements for a name change?
Most of the time, it's going to come up when you go to change the certificate of authority. Like, for example, Alabama. Alabama requires you to have a name approval. It's done by the Department of Insurance, but you have to do it before you change your name at the certificate of authority level, at the Secretary of State level. So you're not going to get anywhere without getting that name approval first. So unfortunately, if you don't have someone that's experienced with name changes like Ilsa, it's going to be trial and error. You're going to submit the name change or the request to the Secretary of State or the Department of Insurance, and it's going to get rejected. So you would have to do a little bit of research ahead of time if you wanted to change your name to make sure it fits some of the state's criteria, or you're going to have certificate of authority delays in the process.
And tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is there can also be some real costs associated with a name change. Is that correct?
It's expensive. Licensing is expensive regardless if you're licensed in all of the 51 jurisdictions of the United States and some of the jurisdictions in the foreign territories. But changing your name can get expensive. You not only have to change your name at the Department of Insurance, but you have to complete the name change at the Secretary of State level as well. So if your agency holds a certificate of authority, you have to change that certificate of authority first in most cases, and then change your name. So you're looking at fees on the Secretary of State side and fees on the Department of Insurance side as well. And it can be taxing on your budget.
And what are the timeframes for this? So let's say I do a name change. What are the timeframes for reporting that?
Once the name has been changed at the resident state, you have a 30-day compliance window to notify the non-resident states. And
are there any exceptions to that?
There are some exceptions, yes, sir. You have some states that the certificate because the certificate of authority has to have name approval, or a couple of other, last minute issues come up. As long as you're making due progress, as long as you are making an effort to get that name change done at the Secretary of State's level and the Department of Insurance, the Departments of Insurance just want to know that there's a change. As long as you make the notifications within a reasonable time frame, 30, 45 days, the Departments of Insurance see that you're being honest. So if you make the changes and you don't notify the Department of Insurance, then you can receive administrative actions and pay hefty penalties for failing to notify of a name change.
That was actually the next question that I was going to ask you. We're talking about administrative actions. Obviously, here we're talking about fines. What other types of administrative actions are we talking about? And in terms of fees, what range are we looking at for failing to report a name change?
They can range anywhere from a simple, letter saying, hey, you failed to inform us within the certain time frame, try to be compliant in the future, to we've seen upwards to $2,000, $2,500 penalties for failure to notify of a name change case. So it can get expensive as well.
Spot on Insurance is sponsored by ILSA, Insurance Licensing Services of America, America's premier insurance licensing experts. To learn more about ILSA and the services they provide, visit ilsainc.com. The more you share about this, the more I can really see the value and importance in working with someone who's experienced in this, because as you're saying this, I'm thinking, I'm sure there's so many people out there that don't even know what you don't know, right? Unless you have experience with this, you don't even know what the pitfalls are to look out for when you're doing an agency name change.
You're right. But the Department of Insurance, they don't ever like to hear, I didn't know. It's always best if something does slip through the cracks. Say you're licensed in all 50 states and you make your name changes in all of them except Ohio. For some reason, Ohio just slips through the cracks. As long as once you realize it, that you say, I'm so sorry this happened. It was, a miscommunication. It was just a simple clerical mistake. The Department of Insurance is going to take note of that, and they're going to be less likely to sanction you. Now, if you say, I'm sorry, we didn't know, they're not going to be happy, and they're probably going to give you an administrative action. Just by simple words, too.
So that's a great takeaway. So if something happens, don't say, I didn't know.
Yeah. Don't put it off on someone else either. Just say it was a simple mistake, a simple oversight. Oversight is a wonderful word to use.
So you've shared where we need to change the name. Are there any other places that we should be aware of about where we need to update or change the name?
If you have producers that use the business name in their address, that needs to be updated as well. If you are a surplus lines broker and you have your registrations with the stamping offices, you'll need to update those records with them as well. Of course, your carriers are probably going to be aware of your name change. That's one of the more simpler processes in the licensing compliance area is updating your carrier.
So I know obviously you do this all the time, but if you were changing an agency name, if you had an agency, you were changing your own agency name, what's the first thing that you would do?
I would go to the California Department of Insurance. I would go to their website. I would check for name approval. There's no fee and there's no limit to the amount of names you can try. I would probably base my name off of meeting California's name approval criteria. It saves you time and energy, and you don't have to market 99% of your business under one name, and then in California you have a DBA. Because if California doesn't like your name, they'll force you to use a DBA, and all of your business has to be done in California under that name. So it's a little aggravating to have to do all of your business in one name and then, remember to do California in just, this odd name.
Thank you. Can you say a little bit more about why California? So what is it about California that you like their approval criteria?
Well, like I said, there's no fee. There's no limit. So if you choose a name that you like, but California doesn't accept it, you can modify that name, and it's a simple turnaround process time. It's 3 days, where if you go to a state like New York or Pennsylvania or Alabama, the process is paper. You have to submit the name request through email, and they'll send you a letter back, or it's a formal written request, and they'll send you a letter back. California, it's online, it's simple, and you get a response within 3 days. So that's why I would choose California.
My guest today again has been Kristy Roberts from ILSA. Kristy, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom with us. And if people want to get in touch with you and they want your assistance with a name change, what's the best way for them to go ahead and reach you?
They can call me at 254-729-6180. If they have any questions, even if they're not, a client of ours, or if they're just in the early stages of the name change, or even maybe starting their business up from the ground, if they have a question, I'm more than willing to answer, to help any way that I can. It's better to do it right than have to do it over.
Well, Kristy, thank you again for coming on and sharing your expertise on an important topic.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Direct your podcast questions to iask@soyteam.com. Share this podcast with your friends, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.
As always, thanks for joining us. And please remember, we'll be answering this week's podcast questions at Spot On Insurance Facebook Live, Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern.